Thank you, everyone, for coming today. Are we all doing okay? Yes? Good. You at the back, you doing okay? Yeah, good. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Piers Harding-Rolls. I work for a company as an industry analyst, Ampere Analysis. Ampere Analysis is an entertainment media research company, and I lead the games research team. And my talk today is looking at the 5 strategic trends which are shaping the future of the game sector. But before we get into those, I did want to just give you an update on our latest sector outlook. So we have updated our forecast in the last few weeks, and this is our current view. I'm hoping you can see this, because these don't look great on here, I have to say. Can you read this? Yeah? Okay, good. So basically, we're forecasting an almost 4% decline this year in the market. There are some more optimistic forecasts out there for this year, but I think that there's a number of factors which are coming together which are meaning that we're going to see a decline this year. Unfortunately, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news for the sector, but we're seeing a combination of factors, and it's quite hard to unpick, the impacts of those different factors. So basically, we're expecting a decline this year, but we're also forecasting a bounce back in 2023. So positivity for the medium long term. So those factors are focused on the decrease in attention related to the post-pandemic environment. So we're seeing a sort of attention deficit for gaming, probably some fatigue, but also people around the edges of the market who are not as interested, I think, in games as they were. They're doing other activities. We're seeing factors, the other sort of general factors, obviously the cost of living squeeze and the macroeconomic situation. So we've got a situation there where I think we're starting to see the softness within the market, particularly in sectors like the mobile sector. So it's been a particularly hard quarter, this Q3, for the mobile sector. And I think we'll see more information about the performance of mobile over the last 3 months in the coming weeks. The other factor is Russia invading Ukraine. That's knocked, we estimate, about $1 billion off the global market, which is about just over 0.5% of that decline in terms of taking revenue out of the market. So just to say that this chart represents games, content, and services spending, okay, on a global basis. So these are the individual categories, and you can see here that we're expecting mobile to be the worst performing category this year. And that decline is taking place in the major markets for mobile, basically. So the China market, there's specific reasons why China is not doing so well, but its year-on-year decline is quite significant. Japan has been undermined, and also the US. US has definitely plummeted in relation to its spending on mobile. So there's quite a few factors coming together. We're expecting the console sector to decline this year as well. And there's specific reasons for that, which I'll get into in a minute. And the PC sector, we're actually upgraded that a little bit. So there's different dynamics within different sectors. PC sector, we've upgraded slightly based on the China performance in the first half of the year. Our cloud portion here only captures pure play cloud gaming services. So those that only offer cloud, and they're only subscription services. It's a very, very small part of the market, but it is growing fast. Again, this might be a little bit hard to distinguish on here, but this is the regional growth year-on-year performance for, we've got a forecast there for 3 years, but it's a historical situation as well. The key points to make about this slide are that the North America market saw tremendous performance in 2020 during the pandemic, and actually that outside of Central Eastern Europe, which is the impact of the Ukraine war basically, North America is going to give back the most in relation to handing back some of that growth that we saw in 2020 in 2022. Western Europe, which I guess is more relevant to you guys, we're going to see a small decline we expect this year in terms of the performance. It's not as marked as North America, but it is still a decline. So I talked about the general factors there. I just want to talk specifically about some of the other device category factors that we're seeing. So in terms of the mobile space, we've had those privacy changes last year, which has slowly impacted, I think had a sort of rolling impact on user acquisition and being able to target specific groups. And that's important for those games which really need to target specific groups, and that also monetize very strongly when they target those specific groups. There's a lack of new games licenses in the biggest mobile games market in China, so that's a significant kind of drag on the market opportunity. But that's being offset to an extent by activity in emerging markets. In terms of the console opportunity, the console hardware availability, Tom this morning touched on that. It's very evident that obviously there's been a lack of hardware. But actually we're going to see that free up towards the final quarter of this year, and I think we're going to get back to some sort of normality heading into 2023. There's also been a lot of delays to AAA games. Those have been pushed into 2023, and that's had an impact on the console market. Offsetting that is spending on subscription services. So, there's more spend on subscription services within the market, and that has offset some of those declines on in-game spending, for example, that we've seen this year. In terms of the PC space, you have that general sort of backdrop of cannibalization from the mobile game space in key markets like South Korea, China, for example, where a lot of PC games IP has made its way onto mobile, and that's driven adoption of mobile, but also had an impact on the PC space. Again, the delays to AAA releases, I think, will have an impact on the download to own opportunity. And actually, we've seen a little bit of a rebound in the first 6 months in China in this year. So that's meant we've actually upgraded our forecast slightly overall because it's such a significant market. And in terms of cloud, we're seeing lots of different services. We're reaching new audiences. It's still a very nascent and small part of the market, but it is growing fast. So I guess the sort of strategic takeaway from the sort of market condition is the fact that although we're going to see a dip now, and that means companies kind of de-risking their investments, they're thinking about turning down what they're going to do with their money and sort of being more sort of protectionist about their strategies. Longer term, we've actually got a very positive outlook for the sector. So you've got to keep that in mind in terms of your kind of investment and your pipeline and what you're doing overall with your growth strategies. So now I'm going to head into the 5 strategic trends shaping the future of the sector. This is not an exhaustive list. There are plenty of other factors which you could consider to be highly strategic. These are 5 factors that we've been looking into and focused on in terms of how we think they're going to sort of make an impact on the sector. So the first one here is the cloud-focused solution chain. It's what we're calling the cloud-focused solution chain. So from the consumer side, we are what we're describing as shifting into a kind of on-demand environment. So we've gone through lots of different dynamic or waves of disruption within the game sector over the last 20 to 25 years, where we've grown connectivity, devices have become more connected. That means we have allowed or enabled new monetization models. As a result of that kind of connectivity, we've got new actual device categories, so the introduction of smartphones. New sort of platform and ecosystem plays in relation to social media. And we're all now heading towards this future of on-demand distribution, which is an idea of being able to access the content where you want, on whatever screen, and at whatever time. And if we think about that consumer-focused angle, there is actually a much broader kind of solution chain angle to the cloud-based proposition. So it's not just about that consumer cloud gaming kind of future vision. It's really about these other factors, these other sort of building blocks, the end-to-end solution chain in relation to the game sector. Again, these little bits under here may be a little bit too hard to read. Anyone who wants my slides at the end of the presentation, there's an email address. You can email me and I'll send you over the slides so you can have a proper look if you can't see them clearly here today. So basically, what does this mean? This building up of these kind of cloud-based, cloud-focused solution chains in relation to production, hosting, maintenance of the game, live ops, all those factors, and then the sort of distribution at the end of it, the sort of end-to-end solution chain. It means that there's going to be a concentration of value chain power and value of that value chain in the context of those companies that have very strong cloud services. When you think about a Microsoft, for example, they're building out all these types of technologies and solution sets. Similarly, Google, Amazon. So they're going to have a concentration of power within those companies. From the, I guess, the content developer point of view, there is this opportunity, I think, to get for these solutions to be more accessible. They're not necessarily going to be cheaper, but they could be more accessible in terms of how you develop your technologies and strategies in relation to your production workflow. Number 2 on the list is subscription, and I guess more importantly, to an extent, hybrid monetization, which is a combination of subscription with other forms of monetization. So in relation to subscription services, we can see there's lots of different types of subscription services which are active within the game space at the moment. So we have platform types of services. That could be Xbox Live Gold or PlayStation Plus Essential. We have content-based subscription services, which are kind of the most visible, I guess, in the Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium. We have cloud access services, such as GeForce Now. Pay-to-play, which is the sort of traditional pay-up-front subscription product related to specific games, so World of Warcraft, etc. Premium and VIP subscriptions, a lot of activity within games, then now sort of combining subscription services with other monetization, cross-section of mobile games, PC games that employ that type of strategy. And even games related, so on the adjacent markets around the game sector in relation to video services, for example, Twitch, there are subscriptions which gamers subscribe to over time. But actually, if we're thinking about the subscription opportunity replacing the existing business model or monetization model, the scale of the opportunity doesn't really sort of add up in that context. We're not going to be replicating what we saw in the subscription video on demand space, for example, or the music space with Spotify increasingly relying on subscription revenues. They are basically incremental, I would say, to the existing opportunity, because games is unique in its ability to monetize in-game. And I think the combination where subscription services are at their most powerful is when you combine monetization models in relation to subscriptions, so you're gaining subscription revenue, but you're also perhaps tying in sort of in-game monetization as well. So this chart on the right, the left chart is our forecast for subscription services revenue as a whole. On the right is the volume of titles which are live service titles within Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. And the orange line there represents the percentage of the total catalog, which are live service titles. And you can see that it's improving over time. And Game Pass is a powerful platform for reaching new users and having an engaged user base. So having a game, even a free-to-play game, which would normally not have, obviously, a premium dynamic, having that ability to put that into those services gives you the ability to continue to monetize through live service and in-game monetization. One area of hybrid monetization which we haven't really seen yet in the subscription space, which I think we potentially could, is more use of advertising. So we've seen in the SVOD space these ad tier services coming. So we've got Netflix, the ad-supported version, we've got Disney Plus ad version, etc. We could see a Game Pass ad version, ad-supported tier at a lower price potentially in the future. And the convergence that we're seeing in other areas, so of IP, say in metaverse-like games like Roblox or Fortnite example, there could be, I think there's an opportunity there to see a sort of combination of subscriptions and more ad-based content in relation to those products. So, number 3 on my strategic trends to watch are games IP broadening into entertainment IP. And traditionally, historically, if you go back, most of the franchise building within the entertainment space has really been driven by movies or TV series, which have then sort of gone into the game space through tie-ins for the movie releases over many years. So, it goes back to the sort of 1980s even. There's over 2,000 games that have been released which are based on TV series or movies over those decades, over the last 40 years or so. But now what we're seeing is a slight reversal, although, obviously there have been examples of movies that are based on games IP. But now we're seeing a more concerted drift towards that travel of IP going from games into the movie or TV space. And a lot of that is being driven by the subscription video on demand players in relation to adaptations of games IP. And they're doing that because they are, wanting original IP. They're looking to compete. They're looking to address a specific audience, and they're sort of building up their content portfolio in that way. So one of the areas that we like to look at is how these releases across different mediums interrelate. So it's very hard to compare number of viewers or number of sales on a single chart. So we built this own proprietary measure, which is our sort of popularity measure, which is out of 100 for different releases. And this League of Legends view is basically looking at the releases, the original games releases, versus the release of Arcane, which, if you know, was the Netflix-based TV series that released. And we're tracing how it's impacted those other titles. So there is legitimately this franchise building strategy from Riot in relation to League of Legends, and you can see the interrelation of the popularity and how it's impacted that with the release of Arcane. So what are the sort of trends we're seeing in relation to that kind of franchise building, or the crossover, or the convergence of IP in relation to the game space or entertainment more broadly? So we're seeing games companies that are more willing to license their content into the video space. We're seeing games companies that are building their own entertainment divisions, which is interesting dynamic. We're seeing SVOD players who are building their own game strategies. Netflix is the obvious example there. We're seeing a convergence of IP in relation to those different metaverse-type games that I mentioned. So Fortnite obviously get access to different branded content from different entertainment spaces in that respect. But they become more important access points for entertainment of all types. And there is some overlap between the production workflows increasingly. So basically, the ability to produce 3D content is relevant to both sectors, and there is a convergence of the technology and the skills used to produce that. So that sort of IP convergence fits nicely with my next trend, which is, no one's actually mentioned that in on any of the talks. Maybe I've missed some, but the metaverse. I may be the first person to mention the concept of the metaverse. It's perhaps gone off the boil a little bit in the last few months because of the whole Web3 crypto kind of implosion. But I still think it's worth mentioning in the context of games companies, because when we think about the metaverse, obviously it's potentially a very far-reaching and broader technology and implementation, which is much wider than the entertainment sector or games as a whole. And if we think about the building blocks that go into the metaverse, again, ask me for the slides because these are possibly hard to see. The orange highlighted blocks here are relevant to the game sector. So games are really well positioned to take a sort of first mover advantage in relation to the metaverse opportunity. So to keep up with that first mover advantage, you've got to think about some of the implications that has in relation to experimentation within the sector. So there's been a lot of talk of games companies touching or dipping their toes in relation to things like NFTs, which is again another sort of building block in relation to the metaverse. And I think dealing with that negative sentiment around the use of NFTs in games is a significant challenge. But on the flip side, I would say that there needs to be experimentation, because if you're going to push through and take advantage of that first mover positioning that games companies have, then there needs to be a certain amount of experimentation. And I also think it's worth highlighting that actually that very vocal kind of online negativity around NFTs doesn't always reflect general kind of broader sentiment towards interest in NFTs. So this is some of our consumer research where we ask about NFTs, and you can see that in Western markets, I don't know if you can read this actually, but I'll tell you. In Western markets, the sentiment towards agreeing I'm interested in purchasing NFTs is much stronger in gamers than it is in non-gamers. And actually, there's 5 times more interest in that in Western markets, in that agree or strongly agree with that statement proposition. And in LATAM markets, it's about 3 times as strong. So there is this, I think, slight odd sort of positioning in relation to the very vocal, sentiment that gets put out there in relation to NFT use in games. But actually, there is quite a lot of interest from the average gamer, I would say. And my last trend I wanted to talk about is, in effect, the new competitive landscape, because we've had so much M&A activity over the last 2 years or so. It's really sort of ramped up and started to get to a volume where it's really quite significant. We're actually seeing a bit of a slowdown now, understandably, because of the economic situation. I think there's a kind of de-risking situation. So our latest data for Q3 2022, which is a few days short of the end of October, so it's missing a few days, 130 deals versus 150, I think, in the previous year. So a little bit of a drop off there, but you can see that the value has dropped really quite significantly. So this is the announced value. When a deal gets proposed or announced, we collect the announced value. A lot of deals don't have a value assigned to them, but this is the announced value. You can see that the actual value of the deals have come down quite significantly. So there's definitely a slowdown. But even so, we've had all this activity, and there will continue to be kind of consolidation activity, and that is creating a new kind of competitive landscape. And again, you're going to struggle to see this, so please do ask for the slides. But basically, this is all the different deals across different sectors, so different device categories, but also sort of the drivers for those deals in relation to who's being acquired and what sort of business they're in. And I've highlighted here what we describe as the content area, which is in effect content, IP, and talent all rolled into one. And that is the key driver, really, for a lot of the activity in terms of all the sort of acquisition and funding activity that we've seen over 2022. That is driving it, and so that is resulting in more consolidation for the content end of the industry. So we think about what the key implications of that industry consolidation are. We're seeing an expansion of content fortresses, and that we describe as kind of ecosystems or network of content that companies own, and they can shuffle their users around to and advertise to, you acquire from different bits of their portfolio and push them into others. We are seeing a market share concentration. So obviously, there's a lot of news at the moment about the Activision Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft. There's no doubt that that will create a bigger market share for Microsoft, obviously. And that's just one of the examples, maybe the biggest example, but there's other examples of how we're getting this kind of consolidation going on. It will have an impact on market share. Will make those companies, those bigger companies, stronger in the long run. We expect standalone publishers, so smaller publishers, even big publishers that haven't been active within the market. And actually what's happened is a lot of the publishers have been pushed into activity. They've seen what's been going on in the market, and they're themselves looking for deals and mergers or acquisitions. But obviously, those smaller publishers, I think, will be increasingly squeezed because their power in the market is less exposed in terms of getting access to different ecosystems, platforms, etc. Definite squeezing of smaller companies, so smaller entities, indie publishers, indie game creators, increasingly squeezed. If you think about Xbox Game Pass, increasing a number of games which will be live service games, which will be focused on first party rather than third party, and the usage of those games, I think that's an example of where we will see a kind of squeeze in discoverability and usage of third-party games. New major competitors. So obviously, Netflix is a great example. Netflix has shifted into the space. That gives opportunities to independent companies and third-party content holders and game developers. Obviously, there's an opportunity there to do deals with those companies. And then also we've got, so one of the arguments for this kind of consolidation is that the founders or the key executives in those companies that are acquired, they then spin off and generate their own new startups. It's a kind of regeneration argument. I think there is an argument to say that does happen. Obviously it does, but I think, obviously there will be some more opportunities there in terms of startups within the space. But, whether that sort of offsets the kind of market share aspect it remains to be seen. So just to finish up, those strategic trends that I was talking about, they're all interrelated. Well, we view them as being all interrelated in many ways. So, the cloud solutions, they underpin the idea of the metaverse. They underpin the idea of on-demand gaming. They are supportive of subscription services, which flows into the kind of subscription monetization. Subscription monetization is more aligned to other entertainment formats, and obviously there you get this the idea that it's the idea of franchise building in the context of cross-media IP. And cross-media IP, we're seeing convergence within kind of metaverse type experiences. Metaverse isn't here yet, but games which purport to be the sort of beginnings of the metaverse. Those areas, we're seeing a convergence of entertainment and access to entertainment in those environments. And then lastly, all of these different trends are fueling M&A within the sector. We're seeing that slow down a little bit at the moment, but I'm sure that M&A activity will continue on in the future. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.